Hi, my name is Daniella and I've taught myself Spanish, Italian and Russian, and I'd like to share with you some of the techniques that I've used to teach myself the languages. If anybody ever tells you that you can't teach yourself a language, then they obviously haven't tried. One thing I'd like to say is if you do decide to take an evening class or something like that in the language, then I would definitely say that you need to treat that class, which is probably once a week or something, as simply a support for your learning. You need to make sure that you do the majority of the work outside of the class and then use the teacher and use the hour that you have a week to clear up any queries that you might have during your language learning. I would also say that even if you don't take a course, I would definitely buy a course book and work through that yourself. That's what I did with my Russian. And a lot of the exercises are self-explanatory, so it's definitely worth doing. Other than that, the internet is your friend. So here are some of the techniques that I use to learn a language. So to begin with, what I do is I just get an overview. I go onto Google and I try and get an overview of the grammar in that language. So it's a good thing to know what you're kind of getting yourself into. So here, for example, it's good to know that Russian has 3 genders and 6 cases, and that there is no word for the and a. And I also look up the genders. Once you've found out, okay, there are 3 genders, how do I identify those genders? How do I know what's masculine and what's feminine? Make it as simple for yourself as possible. So make sure that you make it look attractive, make sure it's clearly laid out for yourself. I definitely think it's a better idea to write down your notes yourself as opposed to just going online and printing off a grammar table. The reason being that when you write it down, your brain actually has to work with the language. It has to concentrate on what exactly is writing down. If you print it off, it's not likely to go in as well. Plurals are usually something that you need to definitely work on in each language that you learn. Here, for example, very complicated, so it's a good idea to just write down the endings and what they become, again keeping it as simple as possible for a beginner. The alphabet, obviously with Russian there is a completely new alphabet. With other languages, if you're learning French or German, they still have obviously extra letters that we don't have in our Roman alphabet. So umlauts, accents, things like that, it's still a good idea to write those down, all of the accents, all of the umlauts that exist in that language, and what their purpose is. So for example, with accents in Spanish, they change the stress of the word, whereas accents in French change the sound of the vowel, or they might change the sound of the consonant that comes before. So it's a very good idea to know what exactly the purpose of each of those symbols is. The next thing I do is I look up very, very basic vocabulary that you are likely to need in a very simple conversation. For example, yes, no, not, hello, goodbye, thank you, please, you're welcome, but, and, or, very simple vocabulary. And then on the next page, here, your question words. Again, you need to look those up right at the beginning. Who, what, where, when, why, and how. And your personal pronouns. So I, you, he, she, it, we, they. It's important to note that in other languages, it's usually the case that they have 2 different words for you, depending on whether you're talking to a large group of people or if you're talking to somebody, let's say your boss instead of your friend. So formal and informal. So that's obviously worth looking up as well. Here, numbers is the next thing that I always look up. I usually look up 1 to 20, and then as of 20, just the tens, so 10, 30, 40, 50. And then I look up what pattern I need to use to form the numbers that come after each of those numbers. For example, 21, 22, 23. Because obviously it would take up so much space if you were going to write out everything. And usually in each language there is some sort of pattern that occurs, so that's definitely worth looking up. The next thing that I look up are phrases that I need if I'm having a conversation I don't understand. Obviously at the beginning you're going to be saying this a lot. I don't know, I don't understand, what does that mean, can you repeat that please? more slowly, please. How do you say that? Things like that. So Google Translate is usually, as a linguist, not something I would recommend. But in this case, I have to say it's perfectly fine. So absolutely go ahead and use it. The next thing I do is I look up adjectives that I find most useful when talking, when having an oral conversation. So left, right, hot, cold, old, new, now, later, things like that. Here, I also write down key verbs, so common verbs that I'm likely to use in a simple conversation. I live, I have, I want, I like, I read, things like that, but only in the first person form so that I can at least talk about myself. Here we don't have to really pay attention to this because that's just me messing around trying to write in the alphabet that I've taught myself. Again, a little bit of grammar that I've taught myself, keeping it simple, keeping it as attractive as possible as well, using colours, making it clear. Noting down vocabulary is very important. So however you are choosing to teach yourself the language, be it online or with a course book, make sure that you keep a list of vocabulary all in one place that you're learning. I haven't done it here, but usually I also split my vocabulary into different categories. So for example, if I want to look up the word juice and I know I've written it down somewhere, then that would be in the category of food. And university, for example, would be in the category of city, just to make my notes a little bit clearer for myself. Again, more vocabulary and a little bit more grammar, keeping it simple. The next thing I do is I look up countries, nationalities and languages, and I write them all next to each other so it's all nice and clear. England, the English, and English as a language. There we go. And a little bit more simple grammar. Again, at this point in learning the language, you don't need anything that's more complicated than this. So just the people, I, you, he, she, we, and then the endings that accompany them. Okay, so here I'm practicing the Cyrillic script. Obviously, if you're not learning the Cyrillic script, it's obviously still a good idea, let's say you're learning German, to look up a random text on the internet that's in German or French, and then just write it with your hand. The reason being that it's a good idea to get a feel for the language, get a feel for how each word is written, how each word looks when it's written. It just gets your muscles in your hand actually used to writing the language, and your eyes obviously used to seeing the language. The next thing I do is I look up colours. I think the most important thing to note here is that I have not written down the translation of the colours, but rather I have coloured in each word. The reason being that it forces me to read the Russian word. I know that if I'd have written yellow underneath, I would just read yellow because that's what my brain is programmed to do. But this way I have to read, okay, żółty is yellow. I've also surrounded each word by the colours, by things that are of that colour. For example, red, tomato, cherry, pepper, to get the association in my head. Chocolate, brown, things like that. Okay, the next thing I look up is time phrases. So on the left-hand side there, you've got all of your months of the year. Then I've got all of my days of the week. Then key vocabulary like day, night, morning, evening, anything that you might need when talking about the day. Again, keeping it simple, keeping it basic. Animals. Here you can see my Pictionary-like scribblings. Again, they don't have to be good drawings, but I would definitely recommend drawing each of the animals. The reason being that it's funny when you draw them wrong. And it kind of makes you remember. For example, when I draw Mush, that I drew the ears a lot too big. Much too big. And I'm pretty sure that dinosaurs are a bit bigger than chickens. But there you go. Make it colourful, make it attractive, rather than just having a list of black and white animals. It will definitely help your brain separate the words from each other. And here, the last thing that I have looked up in Russian so far are the body parts. I simply went online and Googled a diagram of the body in Russian, found this, printed it off, and also decided to elaborate on it myself because I noticed there are a couple of words that are missing. So I not only added my own vocabulary, but I also looked up and checked the vocabulary that was already there, because I've noticed in my learning that, for example, there are 2 different words for foot, which I'm not entirely sure about. And this is the kind of thing that I was talking about at the beginning of the video, saying that during the week you will come up with queries like this. Why are there 2 different words for feet? If you have a teacher or a native speaker that you could have contact to, then that's the kind of thing that I would be clearing up with them in the hour that I get with them a week. So I'd be asking them, why are there 2 different words for foot? Yeah, so I think the next thing that I'm going to teach myself is probably occupations, so things like farmer and dentist, doctor. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So there's nothing more to say other than happy learning.